In 1969, a Western film by director Sam Peckinpah hit the big screen. The Wild Bunch starred William Holden, Robert Ryan, Ernest Borgnine, Edmund O'Brien, Ben Johnson, and Warren Oates. Now, this film absolutely pushed the boundaries of an American Western to the limits. The American public had never seen a Western like this. Sam Peckinpah, the director, was bound and determined to leave his mark on the American Western scene. This film was extremely controversial because of its graphic violence and its portrayal of crude men who did everything to survive that they possibly could. Looking back on this film now, I don't know how it actually made it past the censors. It makes Bonnie and Clyde look like a cakewalk. This is the most violent film you'll see from that era. There's also some nudity that would send up red flags with the censors. The screenplay itself was co-written by Peckinpah, Wallen Green, and Roy N. Sickner. This film is actually credited with playing a significant role in the use of violence in modern cinema. Peckinpah felt that it was so important to show that the film's main characters were extremely violent men. And their violence wasn't that of heroes. It was in horrific ways, where they used people as human shields and shot unarmed bystanders. The director stated that he had a goal in the movie of giving the audience an idea of what it was like to be gunned down. When Warner Brothers originally previewed the film to audiences, their reactions were often very negative and hostile. They actually said, "Do not release this film. The whole thing is sick." They said it was the worst potpourri of vulgarity, violence, sex, and bloodshed that they had seen put together. The studio actually wired Sam Peckinpah and expressed the desire to cut the film further to give it a more positive response. Peckinpah agreed, but only to one print to be run in one theater. The rest of the theaters would show the original initial cut. The studio had Phil Feldman cut the required scenes and then release all the prints this way. After Peckinpah had such a productive relationship with Feldman for so long, Peckinpah felt totally betrayed. It soured his look on producers from that point on. The director was extremely hard on his crew. He would drive them and create so much friction between him and some of the cast members that it was almost unbearable. Early on in the shooting, William Holden actually threatened to walk off the set if Peckinpah continued to verbally abuse the crew in his presence. Robert Ryan actually threatened to punch him. Ernest Borgnine even promised to give him a real good beating. Before the filming of the movie began, William Holden and Sam Peckinpah started to argue immediately. This was over the mustache that Peckinpah wanted Holden's character to have. Peckinpah won the argument, and Holden wore the false mustache during the entire filming. Now, at the very beginning of the film, you'll see a scorpion is dropped into an anthill, and he's devoured by these ants. The children are playing and laughing as this happened. This image was actually not in the original script, but it was suggested by somebody on the set as something that they used to do as a child. John Wayne didn't like this movie. He felt like this film destroyed the myth of the Old West. Now, when you see Ernest Borgnine limping in the movie, he's not acting. He actually broke his foot while filming The Split in 1968, and he had to wear a cast throughout the Mexican location shoot. By the time filming wrapped, director Sam Peckinpah had shot over 250,000 feet of film with 1,288 camera setups. After the 80 days of shooting, during the actual wrap party with all the crew at the studios in Mexico City, Sam Peckinpah wandered off to an isolated corner of a soundstage and just broke down. You'll find this movie on list of greatest movies of all time. During the filming of it, they used 239 rifles, shotguns, revolvers, and automatic weapons, with over 90,000 rounds of blank ammunition. The bunch actually includes 4 Oscar winners out of the 6 members of the gang: William Holden, Ernest Borgnine, Edmund O'Brien, and Ben Johnson. All won acting Oscars during their career. Now, this film really did change the scenery of the Western. They were trying to make a mean and ugly, brutal film that depicted the times that they were in. One that the only nobility in men was their dedication to each other. Now, the wardrobes were a problem too. The wardrobe supervisor had his hands full trying to keep the extras who played Mexican soldiers dressed appropriately. He had plenty of uniforms at the onset. He had 350 of them. But the Mexican soldiers in the film kept getting shot or blown up, and the costumes would be torn and bloodstained after almost every take. The team worked around the clock to clean and repair the costumes. In all, they clothed about 6,000 men. And we said earlier that the director was notorious for being temperamental. He actually fired 22 cast members during the course of the shoot. He would not tolerate any imperfection at all. He felt like that he paid them to do a job, and they needed to do it well. And if they didn't, they were gone. 7 identical costumes were made for each of the main characters. And believe it or not, every one of them was ruined during the filming of the movie. The budget of the movie went from $3.5 million to $6 million. And the original 70-day shooting schedule increased to 81 days. The shooting itself went surprisingly well. During the entire shoot, there were only 2 small accidents. Ben Johnson broke his finger on a machine gun, and William Holden burned his arm when a misfired squib lit his arm up. The very last scene that they shot in the film was the exploding bridge. 5 stuntmen were paid $2,000 each, and they used 6 cameras to capture it all. The scene was actually shot in one take, but they did lose one camera as it fell into the river and was lost. Now, I just love famous lines from a movie, and this one has a classic in it. The line, "If they move, kill 'em," was voted as number 72 in the 100 greatest movie lines of all time. Excluding the start and end credits, this film contains about 2,721 edits, and that's in 138 minutes of action. This equates to an average shot length of 3 seconds. The shootout on the bloody porch contains about 325 edits in 5 minutes of action, for an average shot length of slightly under 1 second. Sam Peckinpah at one time didn't feel like he was getting enough response out of the school teacher in the railroad office. And by the way, she was actually a teacher. So he told Bo Hopkins to stick his tongue in her ear. And he got the reaction that he really wanted after doing that. Now, Ben Johnson said that the Mexican women who frolicked with him and Warren Oates in the huge wine vats weren't actresses at all, but they were actually prostitutes from a nearby brothel who were hired by Sam Peckinpah so he could tell the people that Warner Brothers actually paid for hookers to be in his cast. The train robbery itself was not even in the script. All the scenes were improvised on the spot. And the same thing holds true for the walk scene. It's known as the famous last walk, and it was completely improvised. The film opened June 18, 1969, at the Pix Theater in Los Angeles, and it grossed $39,200 in its first week. It was produced on a budget of $6 million, and the film grossed $10.5 million in the U.S. box office in 1970. The total box office was actually $11 million. That made it the 17th highest grossing film of 1969. If you get a chance, take a look at this film if you've never seen it, or if you have seen it, take a look at it again. It's a very big eye-opener, and it's definitely ground that had not been walked upon at the time of its production. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.